I just really quickly wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for the bit of support I got in the last video. I really appreciate it. It's been a bit hard lately to find time to make videos, and just seeing all of the views, the comments, the subscriptions definitely motivates me to keep going, and I definitely plan on it. I'm happy to say I'm pretty confident I'll be able to bring brand new videos every single Monday. But yeah, thank you again, and back to the video. Alright, so in this video I'm going to cover the Printer.cfg and how to set it up. In short, the Printer.cfg file is an awesome little file that says, hey, this is what my 3D printer is. It does this through various ways, such as defining the boundaries of your 3D printer, as well as defining the stepper pins, the direction pins, the enable pins, which allow your stepper motors to function properly as well as go in the direction that you want it to go. For example, stepper X in the Printer.cfg. This is your stepper motor on the X-axis. This is what allows your hot end to move from left to right, and as well as what allows it to turn on. And this is, as a whole, what allows your X-axis to work how it should. Similarly, you have stepper Y here, which allows the bed to move from forward to backwards. And then you have your stepper Z here, which allows your hot end to move up and down. Your stepper X, stepper Y, stepper Z need to be set up properly in order for you to get good quality prints. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to go about setting these up here. But I just wanted you to know the logic, because in case something doesn't work, you could be like, hey, my hot end isn't moving left and right. You know that it's your stepper X not set up properly rather than your stepper Y, because maybe your stepper Y, maybe your bed is fine. Maybe it's going forward and backwards the way it should. Definitely understanding how these are set up and how they work will help you narrow down and troubleshoot your way out of issues you're having. So more than likely, the first place you'd want to start with when it comes to setting up the Printer.cfg is setting up the pins. Why? Because it's relatively easy. These are values that correspond to the pins on your motherboard. So with that being said, it will vary from motherboard to motherboard. So in other words, if you did not have the same motherboard as me, which is the CREALITY V2.2 motherboard, you would not want to copy these values, and you would want to follow the method that I'll go over in just a bit here. On the flip side of that, if you did have the CREALITY V2.2 silent motherboard, you would be able to likely copy these pins and have it operate. I would still exercise some caution there, because from experience, even though the pin might match, the polarity on the stepper motor might not. And what that basically means is that it's possible that your X-axis could be going right to home instead of going left to home. An easy fix to that would be just to add an exclamation mark in front of the pin value, just like this. I have made my Printer.cfg available in case you do have the same motherboard as mine, but in case you don't, you'll just want to hit up Google and search up your motherboard's pins like I did here. And what you're looking for is a diagram that shows your motherboard's pins laid out. This is a perfect example here. So for example, if we go back to the Printer.cfg, and if I wanted to set up the stepper pin, which is step pin, I would look for step pin in the diagram. Under the X here, we see step as well as PF0. So we would take PF0, go back to the Printer.cfg, under stepper X, where it says step pin, we would type in PF0. So really it's just taking all of these values and filling them into their corresponding pin. So overall, aside from it being a bit tedious to type in all of these values in, not too difficult. I got asked quite a bit about the SKR Mini E3 V3, and so I thought, as another example, I'd search those pins up. So here we are, I searched them up, and I was able to find their GitHub page here with the diagram on it. And here we have all the information we'd need to set the pins up. So as an example, we have the stepper X here. We would take the direction pin PB12 and type it in, PB12. And there we go, the direction pin has been set up to work with the SKR Mini E3V3. In case you're wondering about the interface that I'm using right now, it's just the fluid interface that comes with the CREALITY Sonic Pad by looking up your Sonic Pad's IP address and accessing it through a web browser. But it goes without saying that you can edit your Printer.cfg with any text editor app, as well as manually move your 3D printer's hot end through your 3D printer's interface. Next up, we're going to tackle bed screws. Manual bed leveling is an incredibly useful calibration tool that you definitely want to have. This feature can easily be added by setting up this bed screws information in your Printer.cfg. The only values you'll want to adjust are the values above the screw name, such as this line here, this line here, this line here, as well as this line here. These values next to the name are, as you might have guessed, coordinates to give the location of the bed screw. To get the screw coordinates, this can easily be done by homing your printer. After homing your printer, all that you'll want to do now is to move your hot end above each screw one by one, each time making a note of the coordinates. The screw order will be screw 1, screw 2, screw 3, and screw 4. It's easy to identify these screws by looking underneath the bed, locating the springs, and where the springs are is where the screws are. For example, I'll move my hot end to screw number 1. This is roughly where screw number 1 is. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want it to be as close as possible. And now I would just make a note of these coordinates here, and I would go back to my Printer.cfg, and to the right of screw 1, the values I would want to add are these coordinates here, 355. And that right there would be screw number 1 finished. Next up, I would just want to go to screw number 2, which would be roughly here. I would then take these values and add them to screw 2, and that would be screw number 2 ready to go. And around here would be screw number 3. Again, I would just copy these coordinates, go back to my Printer.cfg, and add them here. And lastly, you would just want to go to screw number 4. And around here would be the coordinates for screw number 4. Lastly, you would just copy these coordinates just like before. Go to screw 4. Add them to here. After that, you would have successfully set up the bed screw segment on your Printer.cfg. And you would just want to save. Alright, so now that we have successfully taken care of that bed screws section, we're going to be working on the BLTouch section, and specifically the X and Y offsets. I'll be going over how to find these values. As far as the pins go, it will be the same situation we spoke about earlier. It would just be finding your motherboard, finding these pins, and the corresponding values that are for your motherboard. And just a quick little rundown here on what these values are. It is essentially the distance between the probe of your BLTouch to the nozzle of your hot end, and that is really all that is. We're just finding those values. The first step in finding the X and Y offsets is to home the printer. After homing the printer, all you'll want to do is lay out a surface area that you can write on, and I'll show you what I mean. I've never been very good at arts and crafts, so please forgive me. I know you can do better. Now what I've done here is what it seems like. I took 2 index cards and I taped them to the bed. This is so that I have an area to write on. Next up, I will move my printer to X100 as well as Y100. This is honestly just so that I can do easy math. After moving your hot end to X100 and Y100, all you'll want to do is lower your hot end as close to the bed as possible. Make sure it isn't touching it, but you want to just have it above it ever so slightly. I like to do this because I'm quite blind, and this process here really relies on your depth perception. And what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be taking a note of where the probe is. And so to do this, you can quite literally put a dot below the probe. However, if you're able to run a command, then I would recommend typing in probe. After doing so, you'll hit enter, and I like to do this so that I can really get a good look at where it's probing the bed. Upon probing, you'll be able to accurately see where that probe touches. You'll make a note of it. You'll probe again, and just as I thought, I am severely blind. Where I marked initially is not where the probe probed, not even close. So I'll just run that probe again and shoot my shot, and it looks like I actually got pretty close that time. It might be pretty spot on. After having marked that probe's location, you'll just want to move the hot end's nozzle directly onto that marked location there. After having moved your hot end's nozzle onto that mark, you'll just want to make a note of the X and Y coordinates. Mine happen to be 69 on the X-axis and 60 on the Y-axis. The final step in this process is simply taking the ending coordinates and subtracting them by the starting coordinates. So in this case, that would mean taking 69 and subtracting it by 100. And that would give us negative 31. So that would mean that negative 31 would be our X offset. And likewise, we would take 60 and subtract that by 100. And we would get negative 40, which would give us our Y offset. After this point, we would just want to take these values, go back to the Printer.cfg, go to the BLTouch section, and under X offset, we would type in negative 31. As for the Y offset, we would type in negative 40, and that would give us a successfully set up X and Y offset. As for these values here, they're actually pretty straightforward, and you can absolutely copy them and configure them to your liking. But just to quickly cover a few things here, samples is how many times your leveling sensor will probe to find a value. As for sample retract distance, it's the distance that your probe will rise after each probe. As for samples tolerance retries, all that means is how many times your probe will retry after a value fluctuates too greatly. And what that basically means is that, let's say your probe probes and it finds that the value is 0.2. And then it probes again, and for some reason that value is 0.23. That right there would warrant a retry. So that's basically defining how many times you would like it to retry under those scenarios. I'm happy to say that we're pretty much wrapping things up with the Printer.cfg. All that's left to do is to define the bed's printing space. We do this by setting up the stepper X position max, the stepper Y position max, as well as the stepper Z position max, as well as configuring the bed mesh minimum and mesh maximum. The first step is to home the printer. After homing your 3D printer, we'll be focusing on just two areas on the bed, which will be the position minimum as well as the position maximum. After having homed your 3D printer, all you'll want to do is move your hot end to the position minimum of your bed. What you're seeing now is an example of having moved your hot end to the position minimum of your bed, which is moving your hot end to the bottom left corner of your bed, the farthest that it can go. It's important to note that if you have a leveling sensor, you do want the probe defining the bottom left edge of your corner, because if you have a leveling sensor and you use your nozzle to define the edge of your bed, that means your leveling sensor's probe is going to be probing off the bed. So it's never going to make contact with the bed, and it's going to dig into your bed until it reaches unholy. So yeah, can't stress that enough. Have your leveling sensor determine the bottom left edge of your bed. Upon arriving to the position minimum location, you would just want to take a note of the coordinates. We'll be using them later. Now in a very similar fashion, we're going to move your hot end to the top right corner of your bed, except in this case, we will want our nozzle to determine the edge of the bed. The reason why is that the leveling sensor would be on the left side of the hot end, meaning that it would be fine to let the nozzle define the corner of the bed. However, if you have a leveling sensor on the right side of your hot end, then you would follow the process we did to find the bed mesh minimum. You would again home your 3D printer, move it to the top right farthest that it can go, and then make note of the coordinates. In this case, mine are 180 on the x-axis and 208 on the y-axis. And now that we've found the position max x and y coordinates, we'll just start by taking the x max coordinate, going back to the Printer.cfg, and inserting that into the stepper x position max, like so. And that would mean that we have successfully set up the stepper x position max value. Then we'll go to the stepper y section, and under position max we will input, in this case, 165. Now all we would want to do is go back to the Printer.cfg, find the bed mesh location, and start to set this up. We would want to set up mesh minimum as well as mesh maximum. And what's cool about this is that all the hard work is done. Now we're just adding values together. And we'll start by adding the x coordinate for the position max, which is 180, by the x offset, which is -31. And that gives us 149. So we'll just go to mesh max, plug in 149, comma, then we'll take the y coordinate for the position max, which is 208, and we'll add that by the y offset, which is -40, which will give us 168. And that right there would mean that we have set up the mesh max coordinates. And now we'll do the same thing with the position minimum coordinates. We'll take the y coordinate value for the position minimum, which is 4, and we'll add that by -31, which will give us -27. So then we'll just go to mesh minimum, type in -27, and then finally we'll just take the y coordinate value for the position minimum, which is 45, and we'll add that by the y offset, which is -40, and that will give us 5. So we'll just type in that for the y value for the mesh minimum, and there we have it. The mesh minimum successfully set up along with the mesh max successfully set up. These values here are values that you can absolutely copy and tune as you see fit. Probe count are the points that you will see whenever you run a auto bed level. Mesh PPs, as you might have guessed, are the PPs around the probe count. And then finally, to find the stepper Z position max, you would just home your 3D printer and move it upwards until you hit the end of printable space. And then it would just be taking the Z coordinate, going back to the Printer.cfg, and under position max in the stepper Z bracket, you would just plug in that Z coordinate value there and save. If you've made it to this point, congratulations, you made it to the end of the Printer.cfg setup. There's just one section I will touch up on, which is the extruder section. The extruder is, as you might know, what pushes out the filament here. And I just want to touch on rotation distance really quickly. Rotation distance, which you might also know it as E-steps, is essentially how quickly it's pushing out the filament. I'll attach in the description below a link to an Excel sheet that I found online that I've been using, and I have found it incredibly helpful. But everything else here is pretty straightforward. The filament diameter would be how thick the filament you're using is. As for nozzle diameter, this would be the nozzle size that you're using. And as for sensor type, you would just want to look up what sensor you're using and you would want to fill this in. And as for max temp, you would just want to fill in what the maximum temperature your printer can handle is. And that's it for the video. I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, please comment below. I'll try my best to answer them. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been really helpful. Please stay tuned for new videos coming every Monday.